I will sing of my Redeemer and his wondrous love to me. On the cruel cross he suffered, from the curse to set me free. Sing, oh sing of my Redeemer, his blood he purchased me. On the cross he sealed my pardon, paid the debt and made me free.
Text of the lesson is in Exodus chapter 3 and chapter 4. The key verse is Exodus 3 and verse 14. And God said unto Moses, I am that I am. And he said, thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, I am hath sent me unto you. Rick's taking up the offering. Okay, who'd like to read the printed portion?
I will. Now Moses kept the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the backside of the desert and came to the mountain of God, even to Horeb. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto them in flame out of the fire, out of the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. And Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush is not burnt. And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called unto him out of the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here am I. And he said, Draw not nigh hither, put off thy shoes from off thy feet, for the place wherein thou standest is holy ground. Moreover, he said, I am the God of thy father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. And the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt, and have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. And I am come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of the land unto a good land, and good and large, unto a land flowing with milk and honey, unto the place of the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Amorites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Now therefore, behold, the city of the children of Israel is come unto me, and I have also seen the oppression wherewith the Egyptians oppressed them. Come now therefore, and I will send thee unto Pharaoh, that thou mayest bring forth my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. And Moses said unto God, Behold, when I come unto the children of Israel, and shall say unto them, The God of your fathers has sent me unto you, and they shall say to me, What is his name? What shall I say unto them? And God said unto Moses, I am that I am. And he said, Thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, I am has sent me unto you. And Moses said unto the Lord, O my Lord, I am not eloquent, neither heretofore nor since thou hast spoken unto thy servant, but I am slow of speech and am slow of tongue. And the Lord said unto him, Who hath made man's mouth? Or who maketh the dumb, or the deaf, or the seeing, or the blind? Have not I the Lord? And therefore go, and I will be with thy mouth, and teach thee what thou shalt say.
Our lesson today is a deliverer to lead. And these are some strange incidents, strange things that happened during Moses' life. And we're going to look at some, and one that's not included in the printed portion, but it is in the lesson text. But to recap, last week's lesson was on the birth of Moses and how that God had preserved Moses. Well, if you go back earlier, we'll see in the first chapter, Exodus, or all how that or toward the end of Genesis even, when God, it was the Israelites went down into Egypt as a family. Was the descendants of who? Abraham, Isaac, and Joseph, the 12 sons of Joseph. And they became, or Jacob, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And they became a nation there. And God really used Egypt to incubate the family into a nation, because they were protected in Egypt. They were protected, and they were allowed to grow. But then you had a pharaoh or a king that came up and didn't recognize or didn't remember Joseph, and they began to enslave the Israelites. That's the context of the lesson to bring us up this time. Then you had Moses, who was to be the deliverer of the people. He was one that God chose to lead the people. Now in last week's lesson, we saw that after the birth of Moses, when he came, and all this wasn't in last week's lesson, but after he came of age, he did something, and he looked and he saw an Egyptian beating an Israelite. And what does it say he did? He looked around first. He looked around to see if anybody would see it, and he killed him and got rid of the body. Then a short time after that, I don't know. I don't remember if it said or not, but he came out and he saw two Israelites who were fighting with one another, and he went and spoke to them. And what did they say to him? They said to him, what, if we don't do what you're going to do, are you going to do us, or are you going to kill us like you did the Egyptian? So Moses knew he had been seen. He knew it was going to get out. And he did something. He fled. He left Egypt. And he went out to, I can't remember, was it Midian? Is that where it was? And he fled Egypt. Now, this lesson today get the right page turned. In Exodus chapter 3 and verse 1 says, "Now Moses kept the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law." So while Moses was in Midian, he gained a wife, and he had some at least two sons. I'm not sure if that was all. I don't remember. But he had a couple of sons, and he was there for, I think, 40 years, And that brings us up to this lesson. But now, says, now Moses kept the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the backside of the desert and came to the mountain of God, even to Horeb. Now he was in Egypt, and up until the time he fled into Egypt, he was raised as an Egyptian. He had all the privileges of an Egyptian. And I'm sure he had a lot of schooling. I'm sure because he was a prince of Egypt, I'm sure he was trained in warfare and all these things. So he had all the knowledge that he could gain from man. But he was sent when he fled, he was into the desert. He was there. I believe that God was preparing him in Midian just as he had been prepared in Egypt. Now, as I said, there's some strange things that happened to Moses. In verse 2 it says, and the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. Now that got Moses' attention. Well, can we understand how, how many of you ever burned brush? We've all burned brush. And what happens? Well, it come up into a pile of ashes. It's completely consumed by the fire. But here, this was a bush that Moses saw that had fire in it. And he went and looked, and the bush wasn't consumed. That would get your attention. In verse 3 it says, and Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush is not burnt. And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called unto him out of the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here am I. Now, one thing about Moses, do you believe that Moses was a man of God before this time? Where did Moses learn about God? His mother. Isn't that the greatest way to teach your children? And for the parents to teach them, to guide them, to lead them, instruct them. But Moses learned about God, I believe, from his mother. Now, Moses was quick to answer when God spoke to him out of the bush and he said, Here am I. Is that a good answer to give to God? What does that here am I, what does that imply? Well, it implies you're ready, you're waiting to hear him, you're willing to listen, you're willing to do. That's what it implies, but we don't always follow through with what we say. And verse 5 says, and he said, Draw not nigh hither, put off thy shoes from off thy feet, for the place wherein thou standest is holy ground. Moreover, he said, I am the God of thy father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. And the Lord said to, I have surely seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt, and have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. Now, here Moses had left Egypt. He left his people there in Egypt when he slew the Egyptian. And he fled and went into Midian. He had been there 40 years. Maybe Moses had forgotten his people. You know, it doesn't tell us if Moses inquired about them or what. But what's important is God hadn't. God didn't forget about them. Said in verse 7, and the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt, and have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. And I am come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land unto a good land and a large, unto a land flowing with milk and honey, unto the place of the Canaanites and the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Now therefore, behold, the cry of the children of Israel is come unto me, and I have also seen the oppression wherewith the Egyptians oppressed them. Come now therefore, and I will send thee unto Pharaoh, that thou mayest bring forth my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. Now this is God calling Moses to be the deliverer, of the one to, of course God was the one that delivered him, but Moses was the one to lead the people, to direct them, to do what God wanted them to do. Now, do you think sometimes that God leads us, calls us, guides us into something that He wants us to do? Sometimes we do it, sometimes we fail to do it. Do you think He lays it on the hearts of people in the church to do what they can for the church? You know, a lot of people say, well, how do you know what God wants you to do? You know, God doesn't speak to us in an audible voice. But I do believe that if we're faithful in the small things, in the church, whatever, if you're faithful in attendance, if you're faithful, in the hearing of the word, if you're faithful to go into the classes, whatever you can do in the church, whether it's mowing the yard, whether it's as ushers, teaching, playing the music, all these things. If we're faithful in these things, I believe that God will lead us and guide us into doing what? I think it will guide us and lead us into doing more. But now, we see in verse 13 that Moses does something. He said, he was called to be the leader, called by God. Now that itself, for a child of God, wouldn't that be a great honor to think that God would want to use something as insignificant as we are to do something for Him? But Moses starts making excuses. Well, a lot of times we make excuses. You know what Moses says here in verse 13, and Moses said unto God, Behold, when I come unto the children of Israel, and shall say unto them, The God of your fathers has sent me unto you, and they shall say to me, What is his name? What shall I say unto them? His first excuse was that, he didn't really understand who God was. Well, we know who God is, but do we really understand the completeness of God? I don't understand everything about God. I think there's going to be more revealed to us when we get to be with Him than what we have here and what's revealed in His Word. But he said, if they say, well, who told me to go to him? So what is not his name? What shall I say unto them? In verse 14 it says, And God said unto Moses, I am that I am. And he said, Thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, I am has sent me unto you. Now, I am, what does that signify? What does that show us? Now, this is one of the names of God, isn't it? Is I am. Well, everything we see, that word I am encompasses everything. Everything we can see, everything we can feel came from God. The life that we have came in the flesh. Who did it come from? Well, if you go back to Genesis, when God formed Adam, He breathed the breath of God, or breath of life, into Adam. That breath of life came from God, and that breath of life was eternal. Adam was formed and given life that was eternal. But he disobeyed, and therefore death passed upon the body. Now it tells us here in verse 10, And Moses said unto the Lord, O my Lord, I am not eloquent, neither hitherto nor since thou hast spoken unto thy servant, but I am slow of speech and of slow tongue. And the Lord said unto him, Who hath made man's mouth? Or who maketh the dumb or deaf? Or the seeing or the blind? Have not I the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with thy mouth, and teach thee what thou shalt say. Another excuse that Moses had was, I can't talk. I don't know whether he stuttered, what he did. How many of you know who Mel Tillis is? Mel Tillis was a great singer. He had a beautiful voice. He could sing, but you get him talking, what happened? He stuttered real bad. And there's a boy that I went to school with that in my class. He had a twin sister, but he stuttered real bad. She didn't, and when of course I didn't hear him sing all that much because we didn't have choir and all that stuff in school like they do now. But he could sing without stuttering. I don't know. I don't understand how that happens. But apparently Moses had some kind of problem with speaking. And he tried to use that as an excuse. Do you think sometimes that we try to invent excuses to keep from doing what God leads us to do? I think sometimes we do. But God called him. God provided. Now, first he didn't know how to answer the people. And then he come up and said, well, I can't speak. Well, I'll and God had told him before that he would put his words in his mouth. And here, God told him that he would give him his brother, Aaron, to be his mouthpiece, to speak for him. And Moses would give Aaron the words of God to speak. This was another excuse. Now as I said, there are some strange incidences, but in the let's see where right after this, I was looking for the in verse 12 in chapter 4, God speaking to Moses says, now therefore go, and I will be with thy mouth, and teach thee what thou shalt say. And he said, O my Lord, send, I pray thee, by the hand of him whom thou wilt send. It says in verse 14, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he said, is not Aaron the Levite thy brother? I know that he can speak well, and also behold, he cometh forth to meet thee, and when he seeth thee, he will be glad in his heart. The anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses. Why? Because he kept making excuses. He kept trying to get out of doing what God wanted him to do. Does God expect obedience from his children? Yes, we should be obedient. And Moses kept excuse after excuse. Now, there's another incident, strange incident I said earlier. In verse 18, it says, and Moses went and returned to Jethro his father-in-law, and said unto him, let me go, I pray thee, and return unto my brethren which are in Egypt, and see whether they be yet alive. And Jethro said to Moses, go in peace. And the Lord said unto Moses in Midian, go, return into Egypt, for all the men are dead which sought thy life. And Moses took his wife and his sons, and set them upon an ass, and he returned to the land of Egypt. And Moses took the rod of God in his hand. And the Lord said unto Moses, when thou goest to return into Egypt, see that thou do all those wonders before Pharaoh, which I have put in thine hand, but I will harden his heart, that he shall not let the people go. And thou shalt say unto Pharaoh, Thus saith the Lord, Israel is my son, even my firstborn. And I say unto thee, Let my son go, and he may serve me. And if thou refuse to let him go, behold, I will slay thy son, even thy firstborn. Now it seems here that Moses is finally doing what God wanted him to do. That's a good thing, isn't it? To be obedient to God. But I want you to look at this next verse. As I said, the strange incidents in the life of Moses. In verse 24 it says, And it came to pass by the way in the end that the Lord met him and sought to what? Sought to kill him. Now, isn't that a strange incident? I'm not making it up. Let's go ahead and read this. Verse 25, Then Zipporah, and that was Moses' wife, took a sharp stone and cut off the foreskin of her son and cast it at his feet, and said, Surely a bloody husband art thou to me. So he let him go. Then she said, A bloody husband thou art, because of the circumcision. Moses was doing what God wanted him to do. But Moses had failed in something. When was the law, and it was a law from God, of circumcision given? And why? What was the purpose of circumcision? It wasn't given to Moses, was it? It was given to Abraham. The circumcision, the command of circumcision was given to Abraham, and it was a sign of the covenant that God had with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, all their descendants. And their sons were to be circumcised on the what? All male children were to be circumcised on the 8th day. Moses was being obedient and going to God, but he hadn't circumcised his son. God sought to kill him because of his disobedience. That's the only thing I can see that would cause it. But his wife, because Moses didn't, his wife did. And God let him go. As I said earlier, God does expect obedience. And God has the right to expect complete obedience. Yeah, a lot of times people today are playing a dangerous game when they see what the Word of God says and they completely disregard it. Even though they may say, well, I'm a child of God. They make that claim, and they may be. That's something we can't look at somebody and say, well, they're a child of God or not. We can't see their soul. All we can see is the life that they present to us. But if they are a child of God and are disobedient in some way, and of course we all are. Yeah, I say it's a dangerous game they're playing because a lot of people choose to do these things, choose to be disobedient. Well, every time we're disobedient, we make that choice. I think sometimes we're more ignorant on what we should do than, rather than what, and that's the reason. But to deliberately choose to disobey God, it's a dangerous thing. Here, the Lord, and this is talking about God. As I said, this was a strange incident in the life of Moses. Now you could say, well, if it said Satan came, and tried to kill Moses, we could understand it more. But this was the Lord. So it's a dangerous thing to disobey God. And we'll see in verse 29, tells us, and the children and Moses and Aaron went and gathered together all the elders of the children of Israel. And Aaron spake all the words which the Lord had spoken unto Moses, and did the signs in the sight of the people. And the people believed, and when they heard that the Lord had visited the children of Israel, and that he had looked upon their affliction, then they bowed their heads and worshipped. Moses went first to the nation, to the children of Israel. He told them what God had called him to do. And he showed them the signs that God had given him to present to them, to prove that the message was from God. And the effect of that was that the people believed and the people worshiped God. Is worshiping God important? It's just as important today as it was then. No less. To worship God. Well, what is worship? Heaping the honor and the glory that God is due on him, not trying to siphon some of it off for us. That's what a lot of people do in the world, isn't it? They'll say they're praising God, they're worshiping God, but yet they try to siphon a little bit off on them. Say, look what I'm doing, look how good I am. I'm doing all this for God. God is using me. I think God does use us. But we shouldn't be proud of, one thing about Moses was an humble man. See, what we present to the world is important. And what we should present to the world is Christ and him crucified. The gospel message is what we have to give to the world. It's worked for thousands of years. We don't need to change it. That's all the time we have.
What do you know today?
Not much.